This is the Morning Tempo podcast. I am your host, Rabanzo. On this podcast, I have conversations with business owners and the entrepreneurial with the slant toward creativity. It's an opportunity for you to learn with me from people who are finding success in the business world, all intended to make your entrepreneurial journey a little bit easier. Thank you for joining me for another episode. If you are listening to this on the day of its release, you may be experiencing an election hangover or still waiting to find out what the results of the 2020 U.S. presidential election are. In any case, I hope you are doing well. Stressful times, I know. My guest for this episode is Max Branstetter of MaxPodcasting. As with my last guest, Louise Brogan, Max and I met at Podcast Movement Virtual 2020. We met virtually, of course, because it is a virtual conference. In this conversation, Max and I talk about his wild business growth podcast, his company MaxPodcasting, which offers production assistance services such as editing, his connections to family business Hippo Direct, and tips for podcasters who self-edit or are reaching that point of hiring an editor. He also gives nice insight into how he's leveraging his network for the podcast and business, how his podcast has helped his business, and his favorite topics from Podcast Movement Virtual. You can check out Max at maxpodcasting.com. Get it? Max Podcasting. He's a really nice guy. He's got great energy and whimsy. I like him. Here is me and Max Branstetter. How many podcast movements have you been to?
So I guess this is technically my second, but this obviously was different this year. But yeah. I went last year for the first time in person and was like blown away by it. It was just totally in love with it. I was like, oh, count me in. Like I need to go to this every year. So obviously it was different. How about you?
First time I actually, wanted to go to it. I don't know how many, I was going to say episodes, how many events in they were, but they were in my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe. But anyway, this was was going to be my first live event. Hopefully, Nashville will happen next year.
I hope
see.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. What'd you think of it for your first experience with it?
I enjoyed the few sessions that I've been in. I started watching one or two that I bailed on, but not that they were bad. They just either maybe it's a little bit of wasn't speaking to me to. Yeah, there's so much other interesting content going on that's pertinent to my world. So I try to tune into some of those. I'm hoping that I don't know. I've forgotten what level of ticket I have, and I'm hoping that I will be able to watch the replays for a week or whatever the extended period is. Because now it's over, and I didn't even watch a third or a quarter of them.
Right. Yeah, I know. When it's from home, it's harder to when you got stuff to do during the day. It's harder to make time for that when it's you don't know how each session is going to be, but hopefully, I mean, after experiencing in person, it was amazing because just the ability to meet people in person and it's just a whole different vibe when you see all the people there and go to different sessions and have the ability to actually talk to the speakers after each session. That's a real it was a really cool thing. So going from that to this year was online, I think they did the best that they could with it, but any way you slice it, it just doesn't compare to the in person. So there's still benefits to it. But
so are you based in Hoboken, New Jersey? Or
yes, Hoboken.
How is it there today?
It's good. It's it's cold. Probably much colder than it is by you. But it's been rainy the past few days. But it's all in all, things are the grand scheme of things. Some stuff is open, but stuff is starting to increase. So it's people are staying. I don't know. I feel like we're staying in a lot more than in a typical year, but you can still go out and do stuff.
Well, that's good. I hope the ability for everyone to move about as you are right now continues to be on the upward trend as opposed to things getting contracted back. I'm expecting things to contract back where we are and some things to shut back down. This is a big holiday weekend where I live in Panama. It's actually like a week long of holidays, and I imagine that we'll see some numbers rising, unfortunately. So you're not from there, right? You're from Ohio, is that correct?
Yes. So I'm from I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, a suburb outside Cleveland, Ohio. So grew up there and went to school in Indiana and then got my first job in Connecticut after that. So that kind of brought me to the East Coast. And since then I've been Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. So I feel like at this point I'm just moving west. It's like going west as an explorer, pioneer out here.
Yeah. Do you think you'll stay in New Jersey, or do you just don't know? Or
Yeah. I mean, my girlfriend Dana is from here, and she's from Westfield, the same town that my cousins are from, and so that's kind of how we met in the first place. And so,
cool.
This is like really home from her. So at least for like meantime, like near future, like I think we'll be somewhat in this area. We both love Hoboken, so I'm not sure like long term, but like
it's home
who
now.
Knows? Who knows? But yeah, it's great, and Hoboken's a great town where it's kind of. I mean, it's still busy, but it's still, compared to New York City, it's obviously got a way smaller town feel, and it's way quieter, lots of great restaurants, and still you can go into the city whenever you want. So it's a nice mix of things.
That's nice. Tell me about, let me ask you about Wild Business Growth Podcast first. Tell me about it, the inspiration, and anything else you want to fill listeners in on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wild Business Growth Podcast, I started, I think recorded the first interviews in July of 2018. And it started, I had been listening to podcasts, and my favorite one was actually at the start first one I ever listened to was called Road Trippin'. Some Cleveland Cavalier players at the time, Richard Jefferson, Channing Frye, Allie Clifton. It was my first time hearing something where I was like, oh my God, these are superstars, and they're just regular people. Like, you hear them and it feels like you're in the locker room with them. It feels like you're on the plane with them, or when they're traveling in a hotel in some random NBA city. And that was like a first kind of aha moment. It was like, wow, like there's something really unique about this podcasting is, where you can feel like you're in the room with somebody, or you just feel like you're having a conversation with somebody, or listening in on a conversation, whatever conversation you want. And around the time, a little bit after that time, I left my corporate job in brand management and joined my family business. We have a marketing company that I literally grew up with. And my dad and I were brainstorming ways to market the business, and we just kept going back to podcasting. Like, whatever we do, we need to have a podcast because it's a growing medium. It's a great way to get your story out there. We thought we'd be great at it. And across our business lines we were all about helping you grow your business. So the different things we offer, like mailing lists, email lists, everything that Hippo Direct, the name of the business, offers goes back to helping our clients grow their business. So we're like, well, what if we interviewed entrepreneurs, small business owners that were doing really, really cool things, and talk about how they're able to grow their business? So that's kind of where it came from. And then the more I started doing it, it just like took a whole life of its own. And I found a whole new love for podcasting as well. This is something I really enjoy doing. And as you know, it's so cool talking with so many inspiring and fascinating people. And especially when you have an interview show in the podcasting world, it just expands your network to like a new level. And you just never know what one interview or one contact with somebody will turn into. And so the podcast kind of took a life on its own. And then eventually, this year at the time of the recording, this has been a crazy year for the podcast because we hit episode 100, and
it's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah. And I've been more and more involved in producing podcasts for other small business owners, and eventually spun off the production business into a whole separate business, which is called MaxPodcasting. And you'll never guess, who some weirdo named Max is, but like, it's definitely a play on words there. But the new Wild Business Growth Podcast today is pretty unchanged from the format, and it's still one new episode every Wednesday morning. It just now lives under the new entity. So you can find everything about the podcast at MaxPodcasting now.
That's cool. And I was going to ask about Hippo Direct in a different way, but I'm like, there has to be some relation, because I was looking at the branding, it was very clear. But I thought, I'm sure that'll come out, and it did. So what's the history of the company? Did your dad start it? How long's he had it, or has the family had it?
Yes. So I literally grew up with it. Like, I think a lot of people grow up and have memories of maybe one or both of their parents coming home from work, and then it's kind of family time after work. I have memories of heading back from school and running downstairs to say hi to my parents who were both working in the basement. So I grew up, my dad started Hippo Direct 1992, year I was born. And so I literally like grew up with it. It was part of our house and it was part of our business. It's done so much for us. Part of our family has done so much for us. And I always thought at some point I'd want to work for the company, and I just didn't know what I would be doing and when that would be. And over the last couple of years that I worked at my corporate job, that became clear of like, all right, this is when I'm joining the business and this is what I'm going to be doing. And I actually started out just focusing on digital marketing. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you kind of realize like, holy cow, digital marketing is a very broad and vague thing. So I helped out some people on the digital marketing side. But podcasting allows you to be more focused in an area that was like a natural fit for me, that I enjoy doing, and I enjoy helping people and helping them save time with their podcast. And over time, it just that whole kind of energy for podcasting and enthusiasm and that growing part of the business at the time really became clear that it deserves to be spun off as a different company. So that's where MaxPodcasting came from. But I'm still doing some stuff with Hippo Direct, some stuff helping out on the marketing side. It's just more and more of my time is more focused on, the new production business in my podcast.
Well, knowing what MaxPodcasting does, you were before, I suppose we may call it the official beginning of our recording, you were saying some nice things about my podcast and my style. But let's say someone who feels they're who's like me. Like I've gone back and forth between having an editor. Right now I'm spending my money on someone who helps with social and some of the other online related things while I experiment with some new things for SEO and contemplate some ads and, trying to get the listener numbers up and all that before I try to sell anything. If I do, but so what kind of tips, let's take mine as an example. What kind of tips would you have, be it, here's some reasons you might want to consider an editor, or here's some easy things that you can do, while you're editing currently. What kind of tips would you have to offer me and someone like me?
Yeah, sure. So there's kind of two sides to that. So one is if you are interested in hiring an editor, and I think sounds like you might be reaching that point. A lot of podcasters reach that point where when you launch a podcast at the start and when you start recording and you start releasing episodes, it's really, really exciting. And that excitement continues for a while. But I think at some point you get slapped in the face by, oh my God, this stuff takes a long time to do. And not just, the recording is one thing, but the editing, I think what a lot of people don't realize is it can take, 3 to 4 times the length of whatever your interview is just to edit a single episode. So think how much time that is every week. And, if you have a podcast that's even more frequent, that's even more. So think about how you want to spend your time and think about, what kind of business you have or what kind of business you work in. What could you do if you freed up, 3-4 more hours every single week and, avoided the kind of stress and time that's involved in the editing side of things. So what I talk about with MaxPodcasting, and this is an example, but any editor or producer that you work with, from MaxPodcasting standpoint, I'm all about saving you time and delivering high quality. So I love to work with small business owners who know that a podcast can do great things for them. They know what a podcast is. They're excited to do it. They know it could be a huge part of their brand and a great networking tool for them. But they know that by no means is it worth their time to do every single minute detail that's involved in the editing and publishing and, licensing music and splicing all this stuff together. And so what I like to say is, whether it's me or someone else, find someone who will take the stuff off your plate that you don't want to do and just lets you focus on doing the interviews and, the really fun stuff and sharing it out. So that's kind of, it's all about that saving time, but also you want to make sure you have a great quality final product as well. And then on the second part of what you're asking, what tips do you have for somebody that is editing themselves? I would say that obviously you need to, you want to listen to the whole thing and you want to pay attention to detail as you're going through it. But don't get to the point where you're over editing. So like at the start, and I remember at the start when I was, doing everything for Wild Business Growth Podcast, I would literally like edit out breaths, and I would edit out like these tiny details that if you go back and listen to it after, 99% of the people are just they're not gonna notice it, or they're not gonna care about it, if that's in there or not. So there's little things like that you don't need to go crazy on the editing standpoint. What you want to look for when you're editing is making sure that the volume levels sound great. It's even on both the interviewer side and the guest side. You want to make sure that if there's any, extra long pauses or extra uses of ums or really, words like that are filler over the top, totally fine to keep some of those in, but you don't want the whole interview to be like, just to make a point. So look for those things, go through it, but just don't over edit, because you need to edit. But it can actually backfire if you over edit to the point that somebody's listening and, words start getting cut off, things like that.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think when I first started, I heard some podcasts, a couple where I was like, something sounds weird about that. And I think it's because they may have been over editing and things just didn't sound natural.
Right.
We were talking about Tim Ferriss when you first came on, and, one of the things I took away from, incredible. One of the things I took away from him was to try and keep it easy, make it as low edit as possible. I'm sure things have changed for him quite a bit since he's, I was podcasting in those early days. But
right.
So I've always had that approach. And I was, to the extreme, I was watching, I don't know if all of his episodes are this way, but I was watching Chris Ducker do one on one of his YouTube videos. We were also talking about Chris because you had him on your podcast on episode what?
99.
Not
that it's a fun memory game to try to remember the episode numbers for each one. But that's an easy one, 99.
I should try that game. And he literally, so he had one of these RODECaster Pros, I think is what it's called.
Oh, RODECaster. Yeah, it's got I don't know what the name is, but the O is like, has the slash going through it.
Yeah, I guess.
A RODECaster Pro. Yeah.
So anyway, he was doing a real short episode while he was doing the video. And I think I'm not sure it was the theme of his video, but he was, batching his content. So it was a nice example of it, because he was doing this video for YouTube, for the sake of video. And then he was doing the podcast episode. So he'd have you hang on a sec while he did the intro. And I was like, man, that son of a gun just recorded his podcast episode and is giving it off for uploading pretty much. I know his kid is an AV guy and, maybe sound treating it and maybe going over it last minute, but it was good enough that he could have just published it right then. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they try to do it.
Right.
Yeah. I wish I could say mine were that good. I always tell people, I pride myself on like, this is going to be kind of live. So don't say, try not to say anything that you want me to go back and edit out. Cause that just costs me time. I don't want to go back and edit. I have to listen to it anyway. I will, if I have to, but
yeah, apologies in advance for that. I can't help that, but I'll try.
Yeah. So, so where's MaxPodcasting going in the coming year?
Great question. So, I mean, at the time of this recording, it's still a very new company, and what I do and how I produce podcasts, that part hasn't changed that much, except, I'm finding efficiencies or what really my core benefits are and who's the best people for me to work with and that I can help out. So, but the overall offering hasn't changed that much since I was doing it as part of Hippo Direct, and it was just a kind of a podcast branch for us. Mm-hmm. What has totally changed is the branding. And I've been blown away. Like, you hear about it, you hear people talk about it, but once you kind of put yourself out there as like and the word experts overused, but let's just use it for now because, why not keep overusing it?
What's your better word, by the way? Do you have one yet?
Well, my buddy Ryan Folan helped me come up with the term of the Instapot of podcasting, which I think is pretty cool.
Okay, we'll go with
that. Good analogy and metaphor for it. But let's, whether you're an Instapot or an expert, once you put yourself as kind of like a name in a certain, niche space, you become top of mind for people, and they know, who to refer to you and who to introduce you to. And I think what has been so helpful in this journey, I'm already seeing it pay off the bat, is, I have had this Wild Business Growth podcast and been doing interviews with a new entrepreneur literally every single week for the past 2 years. And so I had that, before even launching the new business. And so turn around and I've got over 100 incredible entrepreneurs in my network. And I got some great advice from my friend Elise, who is another former guest, Elise Gelwicks, when she was starting her podcast. And I was like, I'm starting this new thing. Do you have any advice for a new entrepreneur? And she's like, you have to leverage your network. And she's like, you're in such a great position because you have such a fortified network from these podcast guests. Reach out to some people every single day and just send a note saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. I got a new business. Would love to chat with you. And so I've been making a point to do that every single day, most days a week, just to reach out to 5 people, often former guests, but also people I know in the industry. Just talk to them, not like a hardcore sales pitch or anything, but just to kind of tell them about the new business. And it helps to be top of mind if they do ever hear about somebody after that needs podcast help. So I think what's really exciting and what's been growing and really cool to see with all like the new leads coming in and the referrals has been the like power of my network is really, really shown itself off. And it's already getting to the point which I knew I'd come to this point at some point, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly. Like it's going to get to the point where like, it's not a question of, if I do, think about building a team and expanding this and growing at some point, it's a question of, okay, when's that going to happen? And how do I do that? So I don't have the answers right now, but I definitely do, and I've been inspired by so many others that, have built a company that kind of started as them and they've grown from there. And I think there's real opportunity to do that with MaxPodcasting as well. So I'm really excited to offer more help and be able to take on more clients from that standpoint. It's got to start with growth on my end, my company's end.
That's cool. And it's nice to have that feeling that growth is coming. And what great advice and what a great reminder. I've used this many times in the past. And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking to myself, I've been kind of remiss on leveraging my network to that extent. Now, that said, I'm doing a survey for the Unstarving Musician. It's actually for the second edition of a book I wrote that's related. And I'm leveraging the network of guests for that survey. And I'm having these wonderful conversations and reconnections. You know how it is with podcasting once you get to 100 episodes or before then for me. It's like I want to keep in touch with every one of you that I've spoken with. But it just, time gets away, right. And, we don't make the time. And so it's a wonderful way. It's been a wonderful way to reconnect with them and a way to leverage the network, obviously. So what a great reminder, man. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it never fails that sure enough, like just having a 15-minute call, maybe it could be even a 10-minute call, 5-minute call, just talking to someone, it might spur an idea in their mind or maybe it's someone that they'll introduce you to, or maybe they even need some help themselves, or maybe you have something just to offer them that was exactly, right at the right time that, both sides needed it. It's always better to make, set up that extra call and take that extra call than to not do it. And, you've seen this yourself. Anybody who's been, podcasting into the tens and hundreds of episodes, you have such a great base, even just starting with those podcast guests, that it's an amazing opportunity to tap into your network whenever you have a new business launching or a new offer, new book release, whatever it is. Yeah,
I love that. And what you gave me a little bit of an idea of what these conversations look like from the very beginning. What does your outreach look like? And is the goal to hopefully get on a call so you can catch up and do these things that you mentioned, like let them know, or does it sometimes consist of other things? But what does the granular approach look like for people that are thinking, I need to do this?
Yeah. And this is like advice right back to Elise. So shout out Elise again. But nice. I literally have, I made an Excel file. I got, I started a VLOOKUP function. No, I'm just kidding. But I did start an Excel file, and I went through my guests, Wild Business Growth, and I made a list and was like, all right, who do I definitely want to make sure I want to reach out to, like, right away within the first couple of weeks of launching? Who do I want to reach out to? Like, when am I going to do it? And when I go through it, I make a point, every day to reach out to 5 people. And I'll first start with an email just saying like, hey, hope things are great. Or if there's anything, recently I saw with them, or corny joke. There's probably a lot of corny jokes and references that you have with your guests as well. But, and then I'll just say like, not sure if you saw this, but started this new business, Max Podcasting. Here's a link. Here's a blog post that I did that shows in detail why exactly I started it. And after that, basically just say, here's my new scheduling link. Totally up to you if you can swing it, but would love to connect for like a quick 15-minute call if you can soon, just to talk about the news, and pretty much leave it at that. And I would say, vast majority of people are more than willing to hop on a quick call like that and talk about the news. I wouldn't go around saying like, hey, would love 2 hours of your time and let's talk about all these things like I need your help on. It's different than that, but a quick call, sharing news like that, and just catching up on the personal side as well goes such a long way. And I think when you have had somebody on your podcast or vice versa, or you're just connected with them on social media, you have some sort of history with them. When you have new news that's exciting and has, the potential to grow, I even had another guest, my buddy Mitch Lotnick, told me the other day, he's like, I'm giving you a ton of advice, man. He's like, I love to see people succeed. Like, people just love to help out others, Absolutely. Especially when they like them and you have a good relationship, and love to do what they can just to help out and make new ventures a success. So nobody can, by no means, nobody can do it on their own. Like, you are limiting yourself at a certain point on, whether it's time or resources. So the more you reach out to that network, it just bodes better for you and whatever you're working on.
Cool. I like that too, man. And it really is funny. I think it's more than anything for me personally, it's a great reminder, because as you describe what you're doing, it's like, I've done this, and I feel like I feel a little remiss that I'm not reaching out to 2 to 5 people a day without having some specific reason, like, hey, can you, would you mind doing this survey thing for the, book I'm doing? And everybody's great about helping me out. If they don't have time, that's cool too. I always let people know you're no matter what, you're still an A-lister with me,
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that's great. So it's a really wonderful reminder. This is just for me and anybody else who just maybe is listening that was at Podcast Movement Virtual, but is there anything that you would recommend that I try to go back and watch during the replay window that you really liked?
Yeah, there's one of my favorite parts of Podcast Movement is you get the latest and greatest data, however you want to say it. I historically don't know how to say that, but all the stats on who's listening to podcasts, how are they listening to podcasts, what, from the podcast perspective, are people doing audio or video or both? And these, all these things, here's how people are editing podcasts. Like, there's so much information out there. And I think the podcast industry is still so young. There's so much potential on the data side. It's completely, it doesn't compare to, digital marketing or all different forms of, all these different other mediums as far as how much data you have. I think that will come in the future, but for right now, it's pretty limited on that standpoint. And so Podcast Movement is a great place to go to different sessions and get a lot of, deep dives into whatever, data is out there, and say, all right, here's kind of the state of podcasting. Here's the state of podcast listening. Here's all that. So the names that come to mind for that, Tom Webster from Edison Research had a fantastic keynote on that.
Okay.
So that was a really good one. Rob Walsh from Libsyn, who I love using Libsyn, by the way, third-party hosts, helps create your RSS feed. He does something every year called This Podcast Marketing Advice is BS. This is the 2020 version.
Yeah.
And so he kind of has a really funny, but also really, really insightful look on the podcast industry from, a podcast host perspective, and, what it takes and here's the overall trends we're seeing. There was another one from Pro Podcast Solutions. If you're interested on the editing side, Daryl Darnell, he's really good from that. Anybody who's interested in the production side of things, he was really insightful. And then another one that I thought was really cool, if you're just interested in learning some general interviewing tips, there was one that a few different people were a panel on that I watched. A guy, Jared Watson from Cleveland. There's Kara Mayer Robinson, who does a really famous podcast, interviews all sorts of people. Josh Mealy. I can't believe I remembered all these names. I'm
so impressed.
Yeah, I feel like I wrote their names down on a chalkboard like Bart Simpson so I could remember them. But they each had a panel. They had a panel together where they talked about their interviewing tips, and there was some really, really good stuff there. Really, just stuff that makes sense, but also really good reminders for when you're interviewing, especially as more and more people, and probably so many of your interviews, and mine are now as well, are interviewing more remotely. There's things you can do to ensure that you have a great interview remotely, even though it's obviously nothing will compare to being face-to-face in-person interviews, but there's things you can do to improve that. And so it's always good as an interviewer to work on your interviewing tips, which sounds funny, but it can make your podcast that much better.
Yeah. And that last one is probably, although the data part of it is pretty cool. I'll have to listen to at least one of those you mentioned. I think I heard the others. But that last one you mentioned, I really love the art of the interview. So anything I can do to be better at it is fun for me to delve into. So thanks for that. And thank you for spending time with me on your Friday to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Of course. It's the best kind of Friday. So I really appreciate you having me on. And it's, part of learning more about you and listening to your podcasts, plural. I just blown away by your background and how you interview, and you have really, really good stuff. And it's cool that we have, some people in our network in common as well, and people that I just absolutely love. So big fan of your stuff, and excited to stay in touch going forward. But thanks again for having me on and talking about all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. And for those of you listening, and it will be in the show notes, but maxpodcasting.com is where you can find out everything about what Max is doing, and also about the Wild Business Growth podcast. So do check that out. Max, thanks again. I'll be talking to you soon.
Perfect. Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Cheers. This episode was powered by Convertkit. More than just an email marketing company, Convertkit is focused on landing pages too, giving beginner creators everything they need to start building an email list. I've been using Convertkit since early 2016. Their new free plan allows creators to make unlimited landing pages and forms. You can choose from multiple templates, add personalization, add design, include an incentive email, create a thank you page, manage subscribers, and send broadcast emails. The support and educational resources at Convertkit are top-notch, and that is important to me. It should be to you. To learn how Convertkit can help you connect with your audience so that you can make a living doing the work that you love, go to morningtempo.com/convert or the show notes for this episode. Thanks again for listening. This podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you. To learn about the different ways that you can support the podcast, visit morningtempo.com/crowdsponsor. There you can also join the Morning Tempo email list for insiders who want to know what I'm learning from the business owners and entrepreneurs that I speak with and work with, including those you hear on this podcast. Morning Tempo insiders get an occasional email from me with business insights, recommendations, hacks, and anything else I come across that could help you in your creative entrepreneurial journey. And it's free, and you can unsubscribe at any time. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to your favorites. With a whole lot of love to my good friend and former bandmate Frank Salazar, who wrote and performed the Morning Tempo podcast theme song. Frank, you rock. Ciao for now.